Well, good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome to you all from Stationers Hall for this interesting industry committee event, taking a book from pitch to publication, the author, the agent, and the editor relationship. Looking out from my window, I can see that the builders have just finished for the day, and it's now only a few months before we'll have Stationers Hall back again. Soon we'll be able to hold these events in person again in the hall and enjoy the fellowship that brings, or even use hybrid technology to bring people in from around the world. There are quite a number of people online today who do not have a direct connection with the Stationers Company. So first, a short introduction about who we are and what we do. The Stationers Company is a City of London livery company that supports the content and communications industries. Our unique 600-year-old history combines conviviality, the enhancement of business and society. From the invention of copyright to the contributions we make today through education, training, and charitable endeavour. The Stationers Company has its roots from 1403 in the City of London as a trade guild to protect the interests of manuscript writers, illuminators, bookbinders, and booksellers. Unlike most craftsmen in those days who were itinerant, they set up stalls or stations around St. Paul's Cathedral, and as a result, acquired the name Stationers. Over the centuries, the Stationers had the good sense to embrace printing and every new technological advance in the content and communications industries, right up to today's digital media and online publishing. The company is almost unique among the older London liveries with its active links to its modern trades. Out of nearly 1,000 members today, the vast majority are actively involved in paper, print, publishing, packaging, office products, newspapers, broadcasting, both in the analog and the digital worlds. In this fast and ever-changing world, the Stationers Company continues to be that link from the past to the future. Tonight, we have an event inspired by our numerous literary evenings held throughout lockdown, where the focus was on the author and their background. The company's industry committee have had many requests to look at the professional skills and roles of those behind the author that take a book to publication. So tonight, online, we have an author, Sandra Lawrence, her agent, Ella Khan, and her editor, Susanna Otter, who will all have shaped the final work. I'm particularly pleased to have had this event organised with the involvement of the young stationers. Now, I do have a personal interest in this because I've spent my career at the other end of the book production process, where the ink is put on paper and the books are bound. I'm therefore particularly interested in the creative process, which has kept me in employment for so many years. So that's enough from me, and over to Ella, who's going to introduce our speakers and start the interesting part of the evening. Ella.
Thank you so much, Master, for a very warm introduction, and welcome and thank you to everybody in the audience. Just a few housekeeping notes to begin with. This event is being recorded for those who are unable to join us this evening, or if you wish to watch it again. So the link to the recording will be sent to everybody who registered for the event after a few days afterwards. I don't know what the timescale is. The format is going to be a conversation basically between the three of us, with me chairing, and we will have about 20-15 minutes for Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions for Sandra, myself or Susanna, please do type them in the Q&A box, which you can find by clicking on Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and I will monitor these and pick out a few to pose to our panel. So this event from Pitch to Publication, we're going to be talking about the process through which Sandra's brilliant book, Miss Wilmot's Ghosts, came to fruition. This will be published in May. Have I got that right, Susanna? I always worry I get the publication.
Yeah, got it right.
And Ellen Ann Wilmot, the subject of this brilliant historical biography, was a pioneering Victorian gardener who Sandra has spent many years now researching. This book offers a new interpretation of Miss Wilmot's life and achievements, re-establishing her legacy as one of Victorian England's most inspiring trailblazers. And Bonnier Books, where Susanna works, are publishing this, as I said, in May. So the idea behind this event, as the Master explained, is for the three of us to discuss the process of taking that book from pitch to publication, from the archival research that Sandra conducted to developing the book proposal, writing, editing, cover design, marketing. We will explore all of the dynamics of the relationship between author, agent, and editor in working together on a project about a very remarkable woman. So to introduce my lovely colleagues and panelists in a little more detail, Sandra Lawrence is an author and journalist who has written for all the broadsheets and many magazines and websites. She has also specialising in horticultural and heritage topics mostly. She also writes non-fiction for both adults and children. Her 15 books include Atlas of Monsters by Big Picture Press, the Anthology of Amazing Women for 20 Watt, Instant History for Welbeck, and The Witch's Garden for the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew and Welbeck. She's been fascinated by Victorian plantswoman and polymath Ellen Ann Wilmot since her teenage years, and has spent the last 5 years recovering Wilmot's lost archives. And the result, as we've seen, was the beautiful book Miss Wilmot's Ghosts, which will be published in May. Susanna Otter is editorial director for non-fiction at Bonnier Books UK. Her taste varies from the highly commercial to the charmingly literary. Authors she has worked with include Catherine Ryan, Edmund Duval, Melanie Brown, Caroline Eden, and Chidera Aguirre. And as for myself, I am founder and director of Diamond Carn & Woods Literary Agency, a boutique agency representing authors of fiction and non-fiction for both children and adults. My prize-winning and best-selling clients include Chris Lloyd, Laura Jane Williams, David Owen, and Sharon Gosling. I have been a stationer since 2012 and was lucky enough to win the Young Stationers Prize with my business partner Bryony in 2016, after which I've been very involved with the Young Stationers. And I became a liveryman last year. So let's get started. Now, no book can begin without the author. So to Sandra to begin with, you've been a writer and a journalist specialising in heritage and horticulture for many years now. Could you tell us a little bit about how your writing career got started and the other projects that you have worked on in the past before you began Miss Wilmot's Ghosts?
Well, I was actually a singer many, many years ago. I never wrote anything, and not even bad poetry as a teenager. What happened was I attended a City Lit course. I think it was called something like How to Become a Freelance Journalist. It was 2 hours a week for 10 weeks. And I went because somebody else dropped out. But it just clicked. And my coursework was to research and write an article. And at the end of the course, my tutor, who was a classic Fleet Street hack, just said, right, off you go out and sell it. So I didn't know anything about anything like that, and he deliberately didn't teach me. And so I, being completely ignorant, I just called up a whole bunch of editors, newspaper editors, and I sold it to the Independent on Sunday. And then it took a little while to get established, though. After that, it wasn't all plain sailing. But I also started writing fiction, which I still write, and there is some on Ella's desk at the moment. And because it was children's fiction, I joined the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, which is a fantastic institution. And at one of their events, it was about non-fiction, writing non-fiction, something that never occurred to me, funnily enough. But I was really inspired by the speaker. So doing my usual ignorant thing, I just called around some editors. And it led to writing what is known in the business as commissioned projects, which is pretty much where a publisher has a good idea for a book and then commissions a writer to research and write it. It can be a little bit strange because it will often be something that you don't know anything about, and you just have to go and become an instant expert. but as they get to know you better, editors start to target you a little bit more, and you start to be able to write things that you might actually have a halfway decent chance of knowing something about. So more recently, I've been writing more targeted things. For example, the garden folklore books for the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew and Welbeck. And these books, all of them, I would have submitted as suggestions if the editor hadn't come to me first. So that's how I sort of started out.
Fantastic. And obviously Ellen Wilmot is a figure you've been personally fascinated for by a very long time. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more about that, and in particular what the catalyst was that led you to finally deciding to attempt writing her biography.
Okay, well, I mean, I first became interested in her house, Worley Place at Brentwood in Essex, because I grew up a couple of miles from there. And being an Enid Blyton, Frances Hodgson Burnett kind of kid, I just thought it was my own special secret garden. And I only started to begin to wonder who made this extraordinary place, which was completely overgrown when I was there, when I was much older. And one day I was walking around the place with my dad back in 2016, I think, and it was a beautiful day. And I just thought, you know what, this really needs a beautiful picture book. And what I could do would be some lovely pictures of what it used to look like, and then some romantic photographs of what it looks now with probably some mist or something. So I contacted an editor of a publisher that dealt particularly in picture illustrated books, and they were very interested. So I began my work, and I thought, well, there's going to be something new that I can write about her. But everybody told me, don't even bother trying to contact the people that own the archive, because they won't let you in. But being a journalist, I can't don't even bother. So I wrote a very polite letter. And I got a reply from the archivist, Karen Davidson, who basically said, yes, you can come in, but you'll have to wait 18 months because we've just found a whole load of new stuff and we haven't recorded it yet. So if you can wait for a while, come back, do some research elsewhere, which is what I did, that would be great. So I started in 2019. It was amazing, all this new material. And then we found more in a deep, damp, dark basement with loads of rotting trunks. My secret hoard had finally turned up. And I realized that this was sort of a bit more important than a picture book, much as I'd like to do one. So I'd avoided to this point writing a biography because there was already one written by someone in 1980. This was all new stuff, and it just didn't tell her story anymore. I was heartbroken because, well, no, excited, because I knew I would have to leave the publisher that I'd started working with because they didn't do the sort of thing that I wanted to do anymore. It now had to be a proper long form narrative nonfiction biography, and I left, which meant that I now had no book and no publisher.
Which is where the next stage of the story begins. So at what stage of the project, this is the stage of the project, indeed, where you reached out to an agent, you reached out to me. So what led you to do that, to reach out to DKW, and why was it that you felt for this project, having done so much of your nonfiction, directly with the publishers, that you felt you needed the support of an agent for it? Okay, well, few major trade publishers accept submissions from individual authors these days. So the people I was doing commissioned works for, they do take submissions, but I thought that this could actually go to one of the larger publishers. So I needed someone to do an approach for me. I already had an agent who had taken me on for my fiction, but it wasn't really working out. There are lots of different agents for lots of different types of people, and it's like any relationship, you just need to find the person that's going to work properly with you. I hugely respected her, but
it just wasn't going. So when I approached her with my idea, she wasn't particularly interested. And I wanted someone who was going to be passionate about my baby, who'd help me work up a proposal and work with me. Now, I've met Ella some years ago at another Scooby event. Join Scooby, it's great. We got on really well, and we'd even gone out socially. And I knew she was a history buff. I also knew she didn't actually represent nonfiction, but I needed some advice. So I called her up and I said, you know, is there any chance of going out for a coffee? Maybe you can give me some advice and perhaps suggest somebody that might be able to represent me. I really boned up before that meeting, and I created a proper proposal, a little spreadsheet of all the lovely things I was going to show her, and then my laptop broke. So I had to explain why I was excited about Ellen Wilmot. And by the end of the conversation, Ella was my agent.
Yeah, so to fill in my side of that meeting, I remember it very well. As Sandra said, we had met sort of a few years back and socially since, and she was quite right that I wasn't doing a huge amount of non-fiction at the time, certainly not this kind of narrative non-fiction. I represented a couple of memoirs, but it was a direction that I'd always wanted to take my list in and do more of, and just hadn't ever found the right project to dabble with. So an act of faith on Sandra's part as well, to trust me with her baby. But it really appealed because I could see that I think there's a growing interest in rediscovering kind of little known historical women who have not got the credit that they quite deserved in their own time or subsequently. And I knew Sandra as a journalist, as a researcher, as a writer would be more than capable of doing her justice. And the fact that she had this sort of exclusive access to the archives, I could see the potential, but I could also see that she was quite overwhelmed really with the scope of the material that she had, and really needed somebody to sort of be on that team and help her shape where the project was going to go. So you know, more than that, it was just the kind of book that I knew I would like to read as a reader. And the nice thing about being an agent and dabbling in all sorts of different areas, from, you know, crime fiction to children's books and everything in between, is that I can represent projects that I would enjoy as a reader and be very much led by my taste in that regard. So I was approaching the project, you know, in that sense, and thinking, if I'm going to enjoy reading about this, I know that there will be other people too. But we spent quite a little bit of time, didn't we, working on the proposal initially before we got to the stage of pitching to publishers. There are quite specific sort of relatively formulaic template for non-fiction proposals, and sort of information that is quite important to include to get publishers on board and give them the information they need to visualize what the project is going to be like. So we spent quite a few months working through that, me advising Sandra on how to write the outline. You had no book, as we said at this point, so, you know, coming up with what the structure was going to be, how to kind of give shape to Ellen's life in a way that would be compelling and have that sort of story narrative running through it. Doing the market research about other comparable titles, comp titles, they often get called, sort of demonstrating that there could be an audience and a market for a project like this. You know, her own platform as a writer, her expertise, her credentials, your credentials, I should say, for being the best person to write this book. And that was fairly easy, that was self-evident, but pulling that all together into a nice shiny proposal, you know, is something we spent quite a lot of time over. And, you know, meanwhile, I'm researching publishers to pitch to and kind of getting everything lined up. You know, we wanted to really target, as Sandra said, bigger publishers that are able to straddle both kind of projects and topics that are a bit more specialist, a bit more academically rigorous and sort of serious in some respects, but still able to have broad commercial appeal and reach a wider audience and have a bit of oomph behind them. So we were kind of, working on that basis and developing a list of publishers to pitch to. So flipping it back to you, Sandra, how did you find that whole experience of developing the proposal and then the process of submitting it to publishers? And what was it like working with me with Ada during that process?
It was truly exciting and a bit frustrating at the same time, because obviously I've been working on this for ages. I just wanted to send out my pitch and just send off the half page of suggestion that I'd written and call it a day. And of course that's not possible. I had to work out how I was going to do it. And there are many ways to tell a life story, and it doesn't necessarily follow a really straight line, because everybody has these sort of diversions in their lives, and one thing doesn't necessarily lead to another. And so you have to carve out a story that isn't necessarily immediately visible. The trick is to make it look like it was obvious. So I had to write a couple of sample chapters as well as as a full outline of each chapter. And sometimes it did get a bit grumpy making. Can't I do all this once I've got the gig? But Ella said, no, you have to do this now. And I am so grateful. And it is the best piece of advice she gave me. And we had to put Ellen Wilmot within her historical setting to give her context. And a lot of that's now gone. But I know it. And I think it sort of gives us a base for what we have now presented. So I have to say it was a huge joy to work with somebody so hands-on. It's a very lonely life being a writer sometimes. And I realized that it's like it is a relationship, and it is a creatively collaborative experience. And it was wonderful, actually. Looking back on it, I really enjoyed that process, even if I grumped a bit at the time.
I've yet to meet an author who doesn't have the occasional grumpy moment, but most of them also had very many more delightful moments. So this is where the publishers come into it. As I said, an important part of an agent's job is researching and networking with publishers, building those relationships with them in order to be able to sell them books. So Susanna was one of the editors that we sent the proposal to. And Susanna, when you received that submission for Miss Wilmot's Ghosts, what was your initial reaction? And can you talk us through what made you decide this was a project you wanted to publish, and the sort of the process that you go through to make that happen?
Absolutely. So I think, as you sort of mentioned in my bio, I'm a real magpie in terms of my taste. It's very, very broad, and my list spans from the very commercial, so some really celeb stuff, to the more literary. And one of the reasons when I joined Bonnier Books UK, one of the big things I was tasked with doing was sort of giving our list a little bit more appeal to Waterstones and independent bookshops. So I was actually in the happy position of being on the hunt for exactly the sort of books that I read. I should mention at this point that I only do nonfiction. Most editors tend to specialise in fiction or nonfiction, and although I started off doing both, I have ended up in nonfiction very happily. And so a submission, I get many submissions every week, and a lot of them are very easy to dismiss because I don't have space for them on my list. We have a limited amount of books that we do a year, or they're just not quite right, or they're like something else. But when Miss Wilmot's Ghosts landed, I was looking for some really interesting history that was talking about an era that we all know something about, but in a different way. That's the sort of my favorite history book to publish, is that sort of book which is shining a new light on a new part of an era we thought we knew everything about. And so the subject immediately appealed. Ella is a brilliant submission email writer. So one of the big things that you open a submission, but you don't open the submission, you always open the email from the agent first, which sort of gives an overview of the submission. And as soon as I read about Ellen Wilmot, I thought, this sounds like a woman I'd very much like to know more about. And I could see the space for it on our list. I knew that we were looking for this sort of history, as I said, that would sort of appeal to bookshops and independents, but also still, work in the wider market. And then I started reading, and Sandra's writing is so vivid and so beautiful that that was that. I think I sent it around my team that night with a sort of one-line email. So normally as an editor, you have to work a bit harder on your pitch, but I think my one just said, it's Victorians, it's gardening, it's women, I'm doing it, basically. And so that was kind of no one had a choice. I was determined to have the book. I was completely in love with it. And I think for me, the thing that is always a really big tell is, I know I want to publish a book when I can see the cover. And from the very beginning, I knew what the cover for this, I didn't know the exact plants, obviously, because I didn't know enough about Ellen to know the exact plants, but I could see how I wanted the cover to look and where it would sit. So it is always gut, which is an annoying answer, I suppose, in many ways, but it's gut sort of tamed or mixed in with the financial demands of our list and the room that we have on it. So this was a kind of perfect meeting of all of those things.
Yes, we couldn't agree more. To go through each step in turn, we did actually get a couple of offers from different publishers for Miss Wilmot's Ghost. So Sandra, what led you to decide that Susanna's offer was the one you wanted to accept?
Well, I have to be honest, the money was better and a writer's got to eat. However, it was not so much better that if I hadn't really, really liked Susanna's sheer delight in the project, I wouldn't have walked. The other editor was also lovely, and I think would have been very committed, and I'd have had a nice book. But Susanna was really enamored of Miss Wilmot. She got what I wanted to do, and she was prepared to give me the space to do it. And there was one other thing that made me very keen, which she's already just mentioned. She'd just been brought into Bonnier to head up a new imprint. And I liked the idea of being at the beginning of something. I wasn't just going to be another book in the list. I was going to be one of a very small number of books in a new and personally curated list. And I thought, rightly, as it turned out, that I would get proper attention and fabulous production values. The book is my baby, and I want it to be Bonnie, and that's why I chose it.
So the next stage it's always very exciting when a book gets bought. This was all going on, we should add, at the beginning of 2020, so we all know what's coming next. And it's a sort of the other side, the other flip of the coin on selling a book on proposal is that you then have to fulfill the promise of that proposal. You have to go away and actually write the book and deliver it. Straightforward, you might think, but of course, having a year to finish researching and writing the book when we then were suddenly faced with being in a pandemic must have been a challenge, Sandra. So how did you find it, and what was that process of actually researching and writing the book like?
Well, the biggest research headache is pretty obvious. I wasn't allowed into the archives that we'd just uncovered, that nobody had seen since 1934. They were all sitting in big cardboard boxes in a castle turret with no one to look at them. But I had already done that 18 months worth of work, plus all the stuff I'd done over dozens of years before. And only having a small amount of material to look at meant that I looked at it really hard. And I was able to create a solid block of historical context as a solid base for what I was doing. So I really knew the period I was in, which was, I might not have been able to do so much of that if I'd been concentrating on the archives themselves. I got into them later. The other side effect of the lockdown was this lovely thing known as Zoom. We all hate it sometimes, but it can be really useful. And it meant that I could talk to people that were into Ellen Wilmot all around the world, because they were all locked in too. So they were able to spend more time chatting with me than they might otherwise have been able to. So there were some upsides. Sometimes I had to write stuff out of order or leave big gaps or crosses where I was going to have to fill stuff in. As far as the editorial feedback goes, I think any author will tell you that it is both exciting and terrifying. You've just written what is your very, very utmost best, and somebody is about to tell you that it's not perfect. And it's really easy to get indignant and defensive, and I am guilty of both. And the trick is to sort of go, okay, I'm outraged, and then try and sit on it, because the next day you will realize that they probably had a point. That does not mean I did not get grumpy when I was told to lose my 5 appendices by Ella. She was right. I don't need 5 appendices. There are none in there now. But I was grumpy. I'm learning not to write that rude email immediately. I think the one takeaway from this is that everybody in this process has one aim, and that is for your book to be the best it can possibly be. Nobody is doing this to be bad, and it's really worth remembering that.
Yes, and I always find it's really interesting in that editorial process, because we were lucky enough not only to have Susanna, but her colleague Ellie also contributing to the editorial feedback and being a brilliant support in the process. And I'm always amazed when, you know, I've read a project multiple times and I have my thoughts and perspective, and then somebody else reads it and comes up, you know, spots something entirely different that you wouldn't have thought of, which, you know, brings a whole new level. So sometimes, you know, multiple cooks can really help the broth shine, to mix a weird metaphor. But it's also, I think, as you said, you know, authorship can be very lonely, and having people on hand to, I remember receiving lovely excited emails from you when you had uncovered a new exciting you know, fact about Ellen, or a new photograph, or, you know, a new item in the archive that we could get excited about too, and really feel the project developing and shaping alongside you, and equally kind of be there to reassure and give motivation when needed as well, when, you know, things were harder. So coming back to you, Susanna, the book is now sold, you've acquired it, you've got all your colleagues excited. Sandra's getting on with writing the book, and the editorial process is all in train. Can you tell us a little bit more about what happens next behind the scenes from the publisher's perspective, and how they actually get to that, from that Word document manuscript to the finished product?
Definitely. So I think that's the sort of one of the things I always say about editorial is, yes, you spend some of your days, and sometimes more likely your evenings, working on book manuscripts, and that's a great pleasure. But within a publishing house, you're more like a project manager in many ways. So your job really is to keep all the other teams, make sure all the other teams, so all the other departments, the design department, the production department, the marketing department, the publicity department, the sales department, make sure they have everything they need to do everything they can to make this project as successful as possible. So that is about talking to the designers about, so briefing the jacket is what we call it. So you say, you know, these are some comparison titles. So again, what's interesting about the whole publishing process is actually, Sandra, you know, you were saying that actually putting together that proposal was hard work, but it was worth it. It's something that if you have a good publishing proposal, it will carry through from the proposal stage all the way to the finished article. And sometimes it astonishes me, if I look at the finished article, you can see elements of you can see so many elements already there in the proposal. So things like comparison titles will shape how we brief a jacket. As I said, I'm quite visual, so I often have an idea of how I want the cover. So I was working with the designers to find the right illustrator to make this beautiful floral jacket that we've ended up with. I was checking that the title was exactly what we wanted, working on a subtitle, which is a dark art that we're still not quite there with the subtitle, but we're getting there, but it does take a long time. And in terms, and making sure our sales and marketing and publicity teams knew what was coming up, had everything they needed to begin pitching it to retailers, which actually only ever happen sort of in the last, it's the sort of 6 months before a publication that everything really starts to come together. But part of it is being really prepared. So as an editor, always having your pitch, refining your pitch, making sure you can do it in 2 lines for your sales team who just need 2 lines because they're seeing someone quickly for coffee, as well as making sure your publicity and marketing team are across any kind of event that might help sell the book, which in the case of this is just so many because of the fact that there are so many gardening enthusiasts out there. So those were all the sort of things I was doing. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. If I've missed, I feel like I've probably missed something horribly obvious, but I don't think I have. I think that's what I was doing. And making sure also that the book is on schedule. One of the big challenges of COVID was, of course, some books had to move, and especially with a book like this where, we didn't want to rush it. It is a new look at this amazing woman. So we wanted to give it as much time as possible. But also we had a very clear sense that it was a spring book. It's about, there's lots of daffodils in there and things like that. So making sure we had a schedule that worked, so liaising with our production department, and that hasn't been made easy by both COVID and also the various complications of Brexit, actually. So there's a lot of logistics going on in terms of paper stocks. That's the really unglamorous side of things, paper stocks.
But very, very important.
Very important. Without paper, we wouldn't have a book. So there we go.
Absolutely. So Susanna, sort of developing on the theme a little bit more from your perspective, what do you enjoy most about working with authors, and how does the relationship, having a positive relationship indeed between the author and the agent and the editor, kind of benefit the publishing process? I think it's I don't think this is too hyperbolic. I think it's absolutely key to a book's success. I think if you have a happy, I think constructive is the word I would use. It's not always happy, as Sandra said. We have to give feedback on manuscripts. We have to make sure that they're very best they can be. There's a Toni Morrison quote, which I always come back to, which is that a good editor is the third eye. They're cool, they're calm, they're dispassionate, which is not very me, but it is how I try and edit. You are looking for the flaws. You are looking for the things that could just be that bit better. And that's where your job really matters. And so having an agent to help with that feedback, help triangulate the relationship, help liaise between the two can be really helpful. But also just being able to have open and honest discussions. I think I'm always worried if authors don't feel they can be honest with me or say, I disagree. I always want my authors to disagree. I always say the things I'm suggesting are just suggestions. I don't know the subject as well as you. I just wonder about this. So I think it has to be a constructive relationship, because then you can have fruitful discussions which move the project forward. It sounds quite cold to call it a project, but it's that idea of if you're all locked in an impasse, there's no way of moving it forward, and then everything gets stuck. There's a lot of processes going on behind the scenes as well as the author writing a book, but if that bit gets stuck, everything else grinds to a halt behind it. So you really want to work as hard as possible to be reactive to each individual author, how they prefer to get feedback, and be open to those discussions. And I think an agent is an invaluable part of that. I much prefer working with agents. In my quite long and varied experience now, not working with them has always proved to be a mistake. It's always better to have that third person who can really help both sides, and advocate for both sides and do the best for the book. But I have to say this, this one's been a particular joy. I think we're all so passionate about the subject, and it's just been so enjoyable discovering all these things. So yeah, for me, this has been a particularly joyful one, which is always lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And Sandra, again on the same theme, you've worked on books both directly with publishers on your own, as you've said, and you alluded to, how more challenging that can be, both sort of business wise and kind of creatively. And now you've also had this project where we've been working so closely together with your agent on board. So how have you found the two experiences have differed, and how important has the relationship between author, agent and editor been for you?
I would welcome an agent's input absolutely every time. On commission books, the fee isn't really worth an agent's time, which means I have to negotiate the contracts by myself, which is really tough. Most authors aren't set up to do that sort of thing. There are always horrid clauses that you have to push back against, and it's really stressful. I don't understand the business side enough to really get a handle on it, and I always end up feeling really uncomfortable. I'm a writer, not a businesswoman. And I really appreciate the support I get from a hands-on agent like you. The previous one I respected greatly, but was very hands-off and just sent what I wrote in. So I like to have a relationship, and Ella's great in that way, because the relationship is also creative collaboration, not just a business one. I think that's probably quite rare, I'm not sure. And working with Susanna on Miss Wilmot's Ghosts has been a real eye-opener, because with one exception, I'm used to a client-supplier relationship. So as a commissioned writer, I provide a service, and I have no say over titles, image, content, cover design. I'm basically a surrogate mother. And when it leaves my computer, it leaves my life, with that one big exception. So I was staggered, for example, when I was asked what I thought of an artist that Susanna was thinking of commissioning for the cover. I was absolutely staggered. I didn't know what to do with it, because I'd never been asked before. And I finally felt like an adult, you know, an actual author. It was extraordinary. Oh, point me that way every time. Agent, proper editor, please.
Absolutely. And obviously I have a self-interest in advocating for the role of an agent, but one of the reasons I love doing this job is because of that combination of kind of business know-how and negotiation, and the pleasure of creative relationships. And an agent's role is, you know, at its heart a matchmaking one often, and finding those matches, as we very happily did here, where you get a team around a book that all see the vision for that book in the same way and are very much pulling in the same direction to make that happen. But equally, you know, we could go much more into the nitty-gritty of the business side of what an agent does for an author, and how that, you know, takes certain things off the table for them, in that, you know, Susanna and I are the ones having discussions about contract terms and royalty rates, and I'm the one looking at the kind of royalty statements when they will come in, and, you know, after the book is published, and helping analyze and translate them to Sandra. You know, we also do a lot of extra around translation rights and film and TV rights, and kind of making sure the book reaches a wider audience. And again, it's so crucial for me to have an editor who's willing to work with me and who understands that an agent can be a bonus in making a project happen positively, because it helps me do my job better in you know, taking that book to international audiences, in, you know, promoting it and coming up with ideas, and simply in making sure that both the author and the publisher are happy, you know, translating the author's concerns or worries or criticisms, even in a diplomatic way, to the editor, and vice versa. You know, I know my authors very well. We have very good personal and professional relationships. And so if an issue arises and the editor is able to say to me, how do you think best to try, you know, to convey this piece of information or news so that I don't worry the author, or so that they understand how it, you know, sometimes it's good news. And, you know, this bookshop has in this retailer's ordered X number of copies of this book, and the author's messaging me going, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I have no context for this. You know, so we help provide that context and translate the jargon, and, you know, smooth the way. And there's a strategic long-term kind of role for the agent as well. You know, Sandra and I, sorry, as Sandra said, she's also working on some children's fiction, and, you know, thinking about other future non-fiction projects. So alongside, you know, the actual project management of any given book at any given stage, there's also a bigger picture where you're helping and trying to create a career for an author, and hopefully establishing long-term relationships for them with publishers. So it's a real kind of joy to have that collaboration. And, you know, there have been scenarios I've been in where the editors are not as keen to involve the agent, and it makes everybody's life more difficult because you just miss information, and that information might be just the thing I need to sell the book in China or Japan or Brazil or America, or I might happen to have a contact at this. Very rarely happens. Both Sandra and Susanna are far more well connected than me in the media world, but I might happen to have a contact at Tatler who would like to receive a review copy, and if everybody's working together, it can be really magical. So I think we're more or less a little bit early, amazingly, at the end of our kind of main discussion. We do have a few questions in the chat box already, so thank you so much for those. Keep them coming. And I'm going to dive in. So you mentioned, Susanna, earlier the unglamorous side of paper. Obviously, in the Stationers Company, we have quite a lot of printers and actual paper makers in the audience. So one from Mike James here: does the current shortage of paper resulting in massive price increases make it harder for publishers to back a new author and affect initial print runs?
I think yes and no. I think it's a very challenging market in a lot of ways. I think there was a very wobbly moment about a year ago. There was the combination of Barack Obama's memoir taking all the paper and Amazon being completely dominant because all the other bookshops were shut. That was far more challenging actually than the price hikes. The price hikes have been softened by the fact that actually we tend to, all publishers tend to negotiate with a printer for every single one of their print runs. So a small print run would not be affected because we have pricing scales that run across all our books. We place all our books with one printer, which is very standard across the big publishers these days. I hope I'm not revealing business secrets. I don't think I am. I think that's very standard. So it doesn't affect it. It may affect initial print runs, but I think actually, in my experience over the last 5 years, initial print runs, if anything, have gone up slightly. There was a time when they were very low, when we were very worried about Amazon and ebooks, and actually now we've kind of gone back up because economies of scale mean it is easier to print more. So I don't think that, and I don't think it's affected us backing new authors. I think that publishing is hungry for new voices, especially at the moment we want voices from all sorts of different places, and I would hope that that continues. It seems to be that we're able to work with it. It may mean that books go slightly up in price, but we believe that that will be the right sort of way to go about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So second question from Jill. What happens, so she says, a great description so far of how the author-agent publisher relationship works. What happens to the decision process if no agent is involved? What happens if the author has no prior track record or writing experience? So I think as a sort of general point, as Sandra mentioned before, actually most of the big publishers, and certainly for kind of fiction projects more often perhaps, a lot of the bigger publishers generally won't very often accept submissions unagented, partly just to help manage the volume. As the agent, we do tend to welcome submissions from anyone and everyone most of the time. I'm currently closed to submissions because the volume got too much, but we do act as a first filter as well. But publishers do occasionally have open submission days, often targeting particular groups of authors. For example, to bring more diverse authors to their list. And in that instance, authors will be invited to pitch directly to the publishers. And well, Susanna, I don't know if there's anything you want to say there about whether you've had your experience working directly with authors.
I think that for me, it's what you said about an agent being a matchmaker. So for me, I really rely on agents to do that. Not even that work for me, not work for me, but actually I have a list. It's very hard to discern what, in terms of what I'm looking for. It's always quite hidden. It'll be very hidden from the public view because it's hard to find out you may not know how many titles I publish a year, you may not know how many of each certain book I'd like, whereas Ella and I may have had a coffee where I've said to her, actually, I'm really looking for this sort of thing. She can then go out there and find it and bring it to me, which is actually a much more constructive way around things, because you can provide people with exactly what they need. And each publisher is looking for something different at each time. It may be that, you know, a list is changing and therefore is really actively looking for different things. So for me, it's about an agent knowing what someone is looking for and that being really helpful. Whereas I think submitting blind is always slightly risky in that you may not, you just won't have the industry knowledge, and it's very hard to get that knowledge. I think publishing is opaque, and that is a great fault of it. But in this instance, I think it's just really hard to get that wider industry context without having that that kind of crucial middle person who can say, okay, I know exactly who this project is for, and act as a matchmaker.
Yeah, I totally agree. But you know, to sort of on the point of the decision process in terms of actual acquisition will often be the same, in that the author will have to submit their proposal, their project, their manuscript directly to the editor, and that editor will still have to go through the same kind of process of making an offer, offering a contract. But the author will, as Sandra, maybe you can chip in here. You've said in your own experience, you're then the one that has to make all those decisions and communicate directly with the publisher, and there isn't any backup, I guess.
Yeah, it is a problem because all authors, or very few authors that don't have connections, will not recognize that feeling of being the kid with their nose pressed up against the sweet shop window, and they've got no idea what goes on in this world. Susanna just said that it's an opaque world. Yeah, you're telling me. We've got no idea what's going on, and it's events like this that are really useful. And that's why I suggested Scooby, because they have. And I think there's other institutions that work with, I don't know, crime writing and romance writing and things like that, and go to those events and meet people, because quite often they'll do events where you can meet agents, meet editors, chat with them, find out what they're interested in. And I mean, that's how I did it. Just getting out and meeting people and reading their, I don't know, Twitter feeds, just find out what's interesting them, what do they like. You can find out a lot that way. It's not stalking, honestly.
No, absolutely. And we've had another question later on about, you know, how authors can find out what publishers are looking for, and you know, whether an author has to have a track record writing. I would say no, you don't have to have written a novel before to get commissioned to write a novel, to have your novel commissioned. And you know, Sandra's experience demonstrates that there are certain areas of the market where, you know, if you have a journalistic background or even, you know, just an expertise in a particular field, you know, academics get commissioned to write books, for example, on their specialist subjects. Not having a track record doesn't necessarily hold against you. What you have to have done is write a good book. And Jess has just asked the question of what makes a compelling submission. So I'm going to answer that now, because it sort of feels all related. And it's really just about, you know, understanding what it is that your book is going to, what it is about your book, sorry, that is going to be its heart. You know, if somebody asks you, what is your book about? And you have to only describe it, tell them in 200 words, you know, what are the key characters? What are the key themes? What actually happens in the book? You know, you'd be amazed how many submissions we receive sometimes where they don't actually tell you what the book is about. They sort of talk around it. You know, it's a really good exercise as a writer to go and read blurbs, you know, on Amazon, on the Waterstones book tables in store. As Susanna said, often I've seen examples of, you know, the pitch the author has made to me when they're submitting to me. I've used that blurb to rewrite and pitch to the publisher, and then the publisher has rewritten that a little bit more, and that's what's ended up on the back of the book. So if you get it right in your initial submission, it can carry all the way through. And it's really about kind of just knowing what the heart of your project is, and conveying that passionately and concisely and professionally, you know, that also makes for a compelling submission. You might not have a prior track record of publication, but if you've done your research, and as Sandra says, there are lots of organizations out there that you can research and find answers to these kinds of questions, that give advice on how to submit, and you know, the Writers and Artists Yearbook is still the classic Bible. If you've done that research and you follow those procedures and you act professionally and behave in a way that you want people to, you know, behave to you, and don't take anything too personally, rejection is part of the process, unfortunately, then you'll get as good a chance as anyone else. So I'm going to move on to some of the other questions. We've still got plenty of time, so hopefully we'll be able to get through these all. So Tony has a very, I don't know if this is a philosophical or existential or what kind of question. In the publishing world, is sales forecasting an art or a science? Oh, I'm going to give that to you, Susanna.
I think if I or anyone in publishing had the true answer to that, I think we'd all, I don't know. I don't know what the end of that sentence is, but that is the $1 million question, I suppose. I think it is a mixture of both. I think the best salespeople are able to look at the market and say, yes, I can see that this area would work very well, but then are also able to see the possibility of a book that on paper sounds a bit out there and unusual and strange. There is publishing is littered with these examples. There's the kind of apocryphal Harry Potter example where, you know, she was turned down by 13 publishers before she found Bloomsbury. There's also some sort of more recent examples. The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse, which has sold incredibly well over the last 2 years, was a sort of charming thing that one editor said, look, I just love it. And the sales team said, well, maybe we can see it in a few places. But it's that the difficulty is we can't, I think if any of us could predict the future, then we all would have written a book about COVID and made, sold squillions of them. We can't ever anticipate what the sort of journey to publication the news cycle and the journey to publication will be. So I think I suppose it is more art than science, really, but it has to have science behind it. It has to have some data at some point, I think, would be my hedging bets answer there.
Yeah, absolutely. So a very quick question to answer from Carol. In professional publishing, I never worked with agents. Is the royalty/fee split in a standard division, or is that for negotiation up front before the author is taken on? So nice practical question. Yes, agents work on commission, which means we earn a percentage of what the author earns, and we don't make any money if we don't sell the author's book. So again, a sort of another example of why you have to be really passionate about something and really believe in the author and the project to sort of take it on, because there's a lot of work that goes in up front before you get to that point. But yes, that's something that's agreed between the agent and the author at the point that we take on their representation. We have a contract representation agreement, which is very standard. Most agents, or all agents, should have that, and the commission split is pretty standard as well. Society of Authors and so on will have recommendations about that kind of level, so it's pretty standard across the board. It might vary slightly depending on whether you're selling in the UK or whether you're selling overseas, because when we sell internationally, we tend to work with, or at least in my agency, we tend to work with local co-agents who are based on the ground in Germany or in New York or wherever, and we will split our commission with them then. So the overall commission to the author is slightly higher to account for that. Back to the book, was the title always Miss Wilmot's Ghosts, or did it change? It's a great title, thank you, Laura. How often do book titles get changed by the publisher? So Sandra, do you want to answer the first bit of that and maybe explain why that is the title? What is Wilmot's Ghost?
In my experience, titles get changed absolutely all the time. I don't think any of my books have ever ended up with the title that they originally had, except this one. Yeah. This one was always Miss Wilmot's Ghosts, for the simple reason that although she's quite forgotten by most people, actually, if people have heard of Ellen Wilmot at all, it is for a particularly prickly sea holly called Miss Wilmot's Ghost, that it is alleged that she used to carry the seeds around in her pockets and sprinkle them in other people's gardens. So it's an Eringium Miss Wilmot's Ghost, and it just seemed that I was referring to the people from another period. Excuse my cat, she's doing weird things behind me. Stop that, sorry. I'm referring to the people within her life who are now all dead, all ghosts, all forgotten. It just seemed a perfect title, and luckily so far it's not been changed. But yes, most of the time all my titles have gone.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo that, sometimes the title for the book is completely right from the start, and sometimes it just takes a few goes to get everybody on board. Again, it's that thing of there are lots of different stakeholders within a publishing company who would want to make sure it was the right title for the right market, but this from the very beginning was absolutely the right title, and made everything very easy. You know when you've got the right title, I would say. This always had it.
Yeah, absolutely. I always expect titles to be changed. I personally never feel like titles are my strong points. I'm always like mildly surprised and happy when a title that I've suggested somehow, or that I've come up with the author somehow makes it onto the cover of the book. They do quite often get changed, but sometimes it's just obvious from the beginning. Another question from Laura: do you have any tips on what to look for in good comp titles, especially in fiction? Sandra, Susanna, I don't know if you have any immediate thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think, fiction is not something I as I say, I don't publish fiction, so it's harder to talk to, but I think that there are two things you could look for. There's one, which is how you want a reader to feel when they're reading your book. So what was the last book you read that made you feel the way you would like someone to feel when they read yours? And that's because that's about gut, and then you can kind of make a connection that way. I think sometimes it's as simple as genre. So if you're writing in a particular genre, are there books within that genre that really speak to you, that feel like they're similar? But again, it comes down to that gut. So, what is the last book that made you feel the way you'd like a reader to feel when they read yours, and sort of go from there. And then you probably will be able to build out a vision that works as a comp, I think.
Yeah, I'd completely agree, and it's about theme and character, and we tend to talk in publishing in quite sort of possibly esoteric terms about throwing words around like upmarket and uplit and psych thrillers and book club books and high concept, and I think it can be quite hard to get a grasp of what those genres all mean sometimes. But really, when it comes to comp titles, it is about kind of if that Amazon algorithm is going to suggest, if you like readers of this will also like things like this, that's what we're talking about, and that I think comes down to theme, broad genre, and a little bit of nuance. I have definitely had submissions in the past where authors have said, my book is for readers of Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and the Chronicles of Narnia, and I'm thinking, well, one, they're all fantastic books in different ways, but they're all completely different from each other, apart from the fact that they're fantasy. They are kind of all for different age groups. They were all published quite a long time ago. They might be classics, but can you demonstrate your understanding of your contemporary competition? And also I think it's sometimes tempting to go for the obvious bestseller comps, but actually a little bit more thought and a title that might not be quite so obvious, but that is actually a genuine better fit for your book might make more sense. So sorry, I've got some in the chat and some in the Q&A box. I'm going to come over to the chat. Doug is asking, how long on average is it from completion and acceptance of a finished book for print and marketing? So from the point, because I think from the point of doing the contract to having a finished manuscript can can vary quite a lot. It can be a year, it can be 18 months, depending on, especially if it's been written on proposal and the book has to be finished.
But from accepted to
absence, average, Susanna.
I think from accepted manuscript, so from once sort of the edits are done, I'd say we'd always want to have at least 6 months. So once the edits are done and the book is in, 4 to 6 months probably to have your copy edit done, your proofreading, and then have time for publicity and marketing to kind of go out with it, and then printing time. So probably 5 to 6 months. But I would say in general, from contract to publication, as Ella says, can be anything. It's sort of how long is a piece of string, but certainly anything less than a year would be incredibly short indeed, and might happen for a celebrity project, but not for many other things, I think.
Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, it can really depend on when in the year feels the right time to publish books.
Exactly.
So, a book might have been ready a few months ago, but the best time of the year to publish it is going to be a spring slot. So you kind of hold back and just use that time to build more promotional opportunities ahead of publication. So Tim asks, I can see that 5 appendices might seem a lot, but do you disapprove of appendices overall? I think that's very much dependent on the type of publication, isn't it, really?
Absolutely. And I also liked the appendices. It just was for the lay reader, I felt like they weren't some of the material. I don't want to bring up the appendices. I'm now sad about the appendices, and we're too late to put them back in. And I feel
sad. I'm heartbroken.
I know. I'm not at all always against appendices, but it is that thing of thinking being the cool, dispassionate third eye. You could put the appendices online, Jill. That's a very good idea. Perhaps we should do that. Now I'm going to now I've tempted fate. Now I'm thinking about the appendices. I'm going to have to go back and read them and just double check. We don't want them. But no, end matter is very important. In fact, that's one of the big things we're doing at the moment with my colleague Ellie, isn't it, Sandra? Is making sure our end matter is as we want it. Yeah. So I not at all against appendices in general.
I think it's just much, when we're talking about trade non-fiction, and there's obviously a distinction between trade publishing and academic publishing, professional publishing, and so on. And so in trade publishing, where you are wanting, the high street retailers to stock and reach a slightly less specialist audience, perhaps, and new readers, there maybe is going to be less of a tendency towards including sort of more academic apparatus like that. But it totally depends on the project. And some of the material from the appendices was absorbed into the main text where it belonged. We managed to find a way to do that.
There was also, it was quite a nice thing that I was able to do, thanks to Susanna, was that I also had vast numbers of footnotes. And what we did in order to make it not look too intimidating was to scrape out all the ones that were just references to books and what page you could find things in different letters and things, put all those at the back, and then just have any footnotes that actually added something interesting to the story on the bottom of the page. And I thought that was a really nice compromise. So I think I asked if I could do that, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be allowed, but I'm really glad that I was.
Yeah, absolutely.
For the book. Yeah.
I think we've got time for 1 or 2 more questions. So apologies if I don't get to everyone. I'll try and answer this one fairly briefly. And Susanna, I'm sure you'll have thoughts as well. Is what contribution to book fairs make to the process? So I don't know if you want to answer that first.
I think so from my side of the business, they're very much I hate the word networking, but they are about sort of meeting up with foreign publishers who publish the same sort of things as you, meeting up with foreign agents who may have submissions for you. But I know in terms of how they work for my books in translation and my rights team, who alongside Ella, because it depends who has the rights, whether it's the publisher or the agent, but for our rights teams and for Ella, it will be a really busy time of year about spreading the word of the books you already have that you want to sell to other publishers in the world. So they do play a huge role, I think, in the international success of a book. In terms of how it works in the domestic market, I think that it is a nice time to see everybody face to face. There's certainly something I've missed, but editorially they're not as crucial as they are for other departments in publishing, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely more about the translation rights really for us now. It's a chance for us to catch up with our international colleagues, co-agents that we work with, as I mentioned earlier, literary scouts who generally work on they're a sort of amazing in-betweeny kind of role where they work generally for, they'll have a publisher or several sometimes in each territory internationally that they work for on retainer. And their job is literally to sort of then be based in London or New York and know everything that's being published and every project that every agent has on submission. And I don't know how they do it. But they then read and write reports on everything, and kind of they have their client publishers' tastes in mind and feedback to them. What's hot and what's being buzzed about in London at that book fair, for example. And we found it, it's incredibly useful to work very collaboratively with the scouts, and if you get their support on board, that can really make a big difference internationally too. So I think we'll have to end momentarily. So I've got a lovely question here to end on from an anonymous attendee. Thank you for this lovely question. Sandra, what advice can you offer to aspiring authors, and did your opinion of Ellen Wilmot change as your research developed?
Oh, thank you, whoever that was asking that question. I'll start with did my opinion change? Yes, all the time, and it still does. She's a really complicated character that I spend half my life admiring, a third of my life admiring, a third of my life loving, and a third of my life banging my head against a wall going, just don't do that, I'm trying to stand up for you. So yes, my opinion of her changes constantly. As for advice to authors, I think that the best thing that I've learned is to just get out there and meet people, and I don't necessarily mean agents and editors and all that sort. Just meet other people that are writing stuff, especially stuff within the sort of world that you're working within. Follow lots of agents and authors and literary people on Twitter. Get to know what people are talking about. Get to know what people are selling. What's interesting at the moment. Don't try and copy it. Do your own thing, but just and have the guts to be able to just throw a few things out there and try contacting people when you think that they might be right for you, and don't just blanket bomb everybody. Find the agent that is going to work with you and going to work for you, rather than just being desperate to get anyone. It's better to hold out without an agent while you're really working out what that might be, because then you're not under any pressure to come up with anything. And then once you've found people that you like, really craft what you're going to send them, and make sure you know what they're after, which you can find out. They quite often say on their websites, or as I say, on Twitter or Instagram, all these places that they go. Have a look at them there, find them out there.
Absolutely. Well, and of course, that is a lovely question to end on, because it allows me to say, if you want to form your own opinion about Miss Wilmot and her fantastically fascinating and complex character, then you will find Miss Wilmot's Ghosts in all good bookshops come May. So do keep an eye out. We will hopefully be able to send all attendees an update when it's available to pre-order. We were hoping to be able to share the cover with you this evening, but we're not quite there yet. Pesky subtitles and flower arrangements still being tweaked, but it's going to be an absolutely stunning book, though I do say so obviously with a strong degree of bias. So please do look out for that. And of course, thank you, huge thank you to Sandra and Susanna for being willing to join in this event with me this evening and be so candid and thoughtful in your insights and advice. It's very much appreciated. We will obviously, as we mentioned earlier, follow up after the event with a link to this recording. so that you can share it far and wide and watch it again. And we do also have 2 more events coming up on the Stationers event calendar, which I'd like to flag. One is on the March 14th. We have our annual innovation seminar in association with Kogan Page Publishers, which will be part of the preparations for the 2022 Stationers Innovation Excellence Awards. So the theme of that event is ethical business growth and the role of innovation. All are welcome, and the event is free, I believe, although donations to support the Hall charity are always welcome. And then our next literary lunch is with author and historian Caroline Shenton. That will be hosted at the historic The Old Watling Pub on the March the 29th in person, where Caroline Shenton will be discussing her new book, National Treasures, Saving the Nation's Art in World War II.
It's great.
Yes, a really fascinating sounding project. The cost of this lunchtime event, which will start at 1 p.m, is just £25 per person and includes, plus a £5 donation to the Stationers Hall charity. That includes a traditional 2-course lunch, and attendance is limited to 40 people, so book early to avoid disappointment. Further details and booking for both these events can be found on the Stationers website, stationers.org. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thank you again, Susanna and Sandra. Thank you to the audience for your fantastic questions. And thank you to Lucy for managing all the tech behind the scenes, and to the master for his introduction. Have a lovely evening, and I wish you all good night.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you.